Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for honoring us with your presence today. We are super excited to be sharing with you emotional intelligence for HR professionals. And my name is Anissa Avon. I'm the CEO and founder of Turnkey Coaching Solutions. We provide organizational development programs such as coaching, training, emerging leader programs, assessment services, job benchmarking, and a lot of other fun HR development and strategic planning services. So I am thrilled today that we are going to talk a lot about something that I'm very passionate about, which is emotional intelligence. And specifically, this particular webinar is for HR professionals because our expert on the call, Sandra Clausen, I'd like to introduce you to Sandy. Sandy, are you with us?
I am.
Excellent. Well, I want to tell folks a little bit about your background. Sandy works with Turnkey as one of our executive coaches and has for a number of years. She is also one of our senior program managers and more recently has become our lead director of coaching. And so she provides a great deal of expertise and consulting services to my company, and she has a lot of knowledge to offer us in the realm of HR. She received her Certified Professional Coactive certification from Coaches Training Institute. She's also an Associate Certified Coach with the ICF. She is a Senior Professional Human Resources SPHR certification from the Society of Human Resources Management. She is also a Master Practitioner in Neurolinguistics, Programming. She's has a number of other certifications, including her EQI 2.0 and her EQ 360. She holds a bachelor's in management and a master's in organizational management. And if I know her, she's working on some other acronym to add to her name. She is constantly growing and achieving and looking for new ways to expand her knowledge. But one thing that I find interesting about Sandy's background is that when she was in corporate HR, if I'm not mistaken, Sandy, it's been about 10 years since you left your corporate position. You left in 2008?
Yes, that's true.
And you spent more than 20 years in HR. Specifically, you have a lot of extensive knowledge and experience in leadership, development practices and best practices, and employee development. And of course, you've got a long history of business in your background that's enabled you to be pretty instrumental in helping organizations to increase their effectiveness through coaching, leadership development, and what have you. But I'm excited to have you on the call today. How would you like to begin, Sandy?
Wow. Well, thank you, Anissa, for that wonderful introduction. So welcome to the Emotional Intelligence for HR Professionals. As Anissa pointed out, my background is in HR as well. So I am with you and putting this presentation together. I was thinking about it from the HR perspective, how I would want to see it. So hopefully I can give you some information that will be good for you to be able to take back to your workplace. I did the evolution from the HR to coaching because I am very interested in people and what makes them think and what makes them tick and all of that. So that kind of led me to the coaching and emotional intelligence and learning everything I can to be able to work better with people. So I would like to go ahead and start the program now.
So for all of you folks that are listening, if you would have questions along the way, don't hesitate to submit those into your question box there. As we move forward, we're going to try to get to as many of those as we can. And Sandy, if it's okay with you, I may interrupt you from time to time. And if you're going to answer my question a little bit later, don't hesitate to say, hang on, we'll get to that in a second. So.
Okay. All right. So our objectives today is to learn what is emotional intelligence, and I'm sure you're probably already somewhat familiar with that, and how to understand EQ from an HR perspective. And actually, hold on just a second. Oops. Oh. Anissa, you need to step in now. I just lost the.
I'm not actually sure how to.
Okay, I'm good.
There you go.
I'm back. Yeah. So what I was trying to do. Okay, so you guys may have guessed this is my first webinar, and what I was trying to do is I've got this tool in front of me, and I was trying to get it out of the way. Okay, so we're good. Now I can see my slides. I was having trouble seeing my slides. So from an HR professional, you probably understand the fact that I too am human, which is why I'm so interested in what makes people tick. So please understand where we are. So we will have, going back to our workshop objectives, we are going to talk about what it is and how to understand how EQ will empower you as an HR professional to better influence your leadership, your workforce, just everyone in your work community, and why EQI 2.0. I know there are a lot of EQI assessments out there, but we're focusing today on the EQI 2.0. So to start off, I'd like you to think of an individual that was very influential in your life. It can be a family member, a mentor, a boss. Just think about that person for a minute and just briefly think about it. Don't spend a lot of time on it, but just whoever flashes into your mind. Okay, so now I would like you to just jot down the 3 attributes that you admire most about that person. You could just take a minute to do that. Okay, so again, don't take a lot of time on it because it's something that I'd like you to be spontaneous with. So set aside the list, and we'll talk about it a little bit later as we go on. So emotional intelligence is a set of emotional and social skills that influence the way we perceive and express ourselves. So as you know, it's very important that we understand ourselves and where we are on a particular day. If you are in a happy place when you walk into work and you know you're in a happy place, you're going to understand that you're going to express yourself in a much different way than you would if you weren't in such a great place. So how it also talks about how we develop and maintain social relationships. Again, that's very important, not just in our work area, but also in our personal life. So emotional intelligence encompasses our entire life. Also affects how we cope with changes. And you can use the information, the emotional intelligence, how you use information in an effective and meaningful way. So you need to understand what the emotion is, how you perceive people perceive you as well, and understand how the first part of it is understanding yourself, and then all the other things come out from that. So what's the difference between cognitive intelligence and emotional intelligence? Well, IQ is a set of intelligence that peaks around the age of 17 years old, while EQ is not fixed and it's constantly changing, which is the beauty of using an EQ assessment, is because this is one area that you have the ability to assess yourself or others and then be able to increase your emotional intelligence. So EQ and IQ are not even correlated, meaning that there's nothing to suggest that if you have an high IQ, then you'll also have a high EQ. Point in fact, I know in my HR role, I worked with a lot of scientists and PhDs, engineers, and honestly, they were great in their IQ, but when it came to EQ, we really had a lot of work to do as far as how to deal with other people, and I'm sure you can relate to that. So if your IQ is low, that doesn't mean your EQ is going to be low either. Some of the most entry-level workers on the floor, low-skilled workers on the manufacturing floor, the supervisors and leaders in that organization oftentimes will have a much higher EQ, excuse me, than the scientists.
So Sandy, one of the things that I remember reading, you're probably going to give me some of the quotes I remember, was in particular Travis Bradberry, who's, if I'm not mistaken, he's the author of Emotional Intelligence 2.0, right? I think I'm remembering his name correctly. But one of the things that I was so impressed about it was it confirmed something that I believe I'd always known about leadership development and high performers, and the piece about IQ not correlating with EQ, and on average, people with average IQs tend to outperform those with the highest IQs a very high percentage of the time. And forgive me, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's something around 70% of the time. And the research shows that that's something that's somewhat intangible, that is causing or inspires folks that aren't necessarily those geniuses to outperform, is emotional intelligence. Has that been what you've found in this work?
Absolutely, Anissa, and that's how I ended up in coaching. Is I worked with executives in a Fortune 50 company, and they were at the top, very top of the organization. And what I discovered is that they were having a lot of problems with their employees, and they would always say, well, go fire them. And it became very clear to me that it wasn't the employees that had the issue, it was the senior VPs. So that's when I put together my proposal for my boss and went to Coaches Training Institute, and I actually had the opportunity to coach these same individuals, and it was just amazing what a difference it made. So from an HR perspective, I was still in HR and have employees come to me and say, wow, I don't know what happened to George, but do you know what he did today? So that was really an effective way of increasing emotional intelligence for high-level executives that have low EQ. And so, you know, and it isn't something new. It's been around for a long time. So the importance of EQ, here's a quote here, that we should take care not to make intellect our God. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but no personality, cannot lead, it can only serve. And that is Albert Einstein, a brilliant man who obviously had a high EQ as well, to be able to acknowledge that. Another person who really was credited for one of the original initiators of EQ is Daniel Goleman. And he said, out of control emotions make smart people stupid. The importance of EQ, it's not your educational background, it's really, or what you know, it's how you express yourself. And that was even noted by Chinese president, a communist leader. And so it's just acknowledged in every area of the world. Telltale signs of a high EQ. And this is something that actually I read recently in the Wall Street Journal, that you should pay attention, you should really focus on high EQ when you're recruiting for new employees. And so how to tell if a potential new hire, like in the interview process, is if you're asking questions You can listen very carefully and see how they own their failures. You ask them, you know, what was one of your failures, or whatever question that you ask regarding that. And if they actually own it, that is a pretty good sign that they have high emotional intelligence. And when you're asking questions, they will oftentimes reflect on situations, considering impact on everyone when they answer a question. They are natural leaders. You can listen to some of the telltale signs when they talk about working in a team or working with peers. They also focus on how they do things. They're not just talking about what they accomplish. It's not always the I. It's like how we as an organization work together, or how I worked with individuals to accomplish something. And they're very great at resolving personnel issues. So you really want to pay attention and be aware and look for people with high EQ, or if you find that there isn't a lot of high EQ in some of your individuals that you've already hired, guess what? You can work on fixing that, and we'll talk a little bit more later. So job success, EQ is estimated to account for 27 to 45% of job success. Wow, that's pretty amazing. And you think, you know, we used to think that if we hired the smartest person in the group that we would be successful as a company. Not so much a fact anymore. High IQ characteristics make employees much more productive. They're able to work with diverse groups of people, and we all know how important that is in today's world. We have a very diverse workforce, so we want to make sure we hire that can work with diverse groups. They also have able to express empathy. They can listen to others and really, you know, I hear you. They don't have to understand what the individual is saying. They just need to be able to empathize with the person. And they are easy to diffuse conflict. So if there's somebody that is causing conflict with the person or within the organization, their high IQ individuals are very good at diffusing conflict, and they build positive relationships, and we work so closely together in teamwork. So it's important that we have people with high EQ to be able to work better in teams. They're also very good decision makers. So a business case study that was done by Pepsi a while back was they instituted an EQ training program, and the results were a 10% increase in productivity and an 87% decrease in turnover. And this whole thing amounted to 1,000% return on investment. And that was one of the things in my role in HR that was important to me, was to be able to affect the bottom line. And I think as you rise up in your HR career, the higher level you are, the more you are able to impact the bottom line. Or if you have a way of doing that, you're more often to raise your status within the company too. So pay attention to that. Return on investment is very important. And this is a way to accomplish that. Another quote that we have on self-awareness is, "He who knows the universe and does not know himself knows nothing." And that's Jean de La Fontaine back in 1679. So this is not new stuff. It's something that's been around for a very long time. So going back to what is emotional intelligence, and it's a set of emotional and social skills that collectively establish how we perceive and express ourselves. So it's important to understand what drives you. And it's also develop and maintain social relationships. That encompasses every aspect of your work and your life. How you cope with challenges, and as we know, there are challenges coming up, both workforce and personally throughout our lives. And it's how do you use the emotional intelligence in an effective and a meaningful way. It's a predictor of success in life as well as work. So what is the EQI? Well, EQI 2.0 is a way to accurately assess strengths and blind spots. It's an assessment that takes less than 20 minutes. It's a predictable way to measure current levels of emotional intelligence. You receive feedback, and the good news is when you receive the feedback, you have your emotional intelligence report, a development plan, and you have the ability to increase your EQI. You can take the assessment at a point in time, put together a development plan. You can work on your goals. Oftentimes you will do that with a coach, and then after, say, 6 months, you can retake that test or that assessment, excuse me, and it will hopefully show significant improvement. It's all something that you can work on, which is pretty exciting about EQI.
So Sandy, this is a 360 assessment?
Well, you can do both, and
it does have a self-assessment version?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the self-assessment, but there's also the 360 as well. And what the difference is that the 360 or the assessment that I'm showing is the same assessment that you use for yourself in a 360, but you invite others to assess you as well, your peers, your direct reports, and your management to assess you, and then you use the same identical questions to compare how you, going back to that self-awareness and how you perceive yourself compared to how others perceive you, and that way it gives you a plan of areas to work out. So if you're not very much aware of yourself, you're going to find some pretty significant differences in how other people perceive you. So it's important to get feedback from other individuals as well.
Now, just curious, on the self-assessment piece, is it EEOC compliant, or is that EQ? Are companies using the self-assessment for hiring purposes? I would think that they could not use it, but I'm curious about your experience.
Well, I personally haven't used it for hiring, and I'm not sure if others have it, but it's very well. It's the most validated of all of the assessments.
Of all
and
of
I'll
them.
talk about that in a minute.
Because I do know that there are some other EQ assessments that are out there that are absolutely not for hiring usage, and they are not EEOC. I don't know, approved is the right word, but they're not appropriate, and obviously for hiring a 360 wouldn't be a good fit. But you do want to know that the hires are aligned with those high EQ quotient, so to speak.
Well, I mean, it's something to pay attention to, Anissa, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, if you hire someone with a lower EQ, if you start working with that individual through coaching and training and working on goals to increase your EQ, you're not just stuck with a person with low EQ, because this is something that you can increase. So, it's not.
So that's a piece that you're going to walk us through some of that.
Whoops, I lost you, Anissa.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, so this kind of reflects on the question that you just asked earlier. So how accurate is EQI 2.0? And it is, the brand is the MHS assessment. So MHS is in any community, both the psychological community as well as the business community. It's in the health services. That's what the H stands for in MHS. So how accurate is it? A great amount of rigor. There were over 4,000 people took the assessments to validate it initially. And there's a lot of checks and balances built into the tool itself to ensure that you have the most accurate results. So what does it mean? So the EQI measurement has 5 distinct aspects of emotional and social functioning. It's self-perception and understanding your emotions, self-expression, expressing your emotions, interpersonal is developing and maintaining relationships, decision-making, and stress management. So this is what the model looks like. So you can see under self-perception, there are 5 different areas that are 5 different scales for the emotional intelligence model. And under each of the scales, there are 4 subscales. So we'll go through that in a minute, but this is how it is all. This is it in a snapshot. So self-perception, underneath that, the subscales are self-regard, which measures self-confidence. There's a self-actualization, and that looks at continuous development. And then certainly emotional awareness, which is understanding your emotions. And self-perception is just being able to experience emotionally challenging situations and be able to, if you're aware of where you are, then you can quickly move to a better place. Self-expression is the subscales under that are emotional expression and being able to say how you feel. If you're in a situation that's uncomfortable for you, being able to say, hey, let's talk about this. Did you mean whatever? And you can reframe it to make sure that you understand each other. Assertiveness, are you able to stand up for yourself? And this is a measurement under the self-expression that we do. Independence, can you stand on your own 2 feet? Again, that's one of the subscales under self-expression. And that's just the ability to redirect disruptive impulses. So being able to communicate with others in a more effective way. Interpersonal, under the interpersonal is the subscales of interpersonal relationships. How well do you develop and maintain good relationships? Again, we're talking about, when I did the example earlier about the executive at the company that I worked for, that I was coaching, it wasn't, he came in and said, wow, he said, not only has it improved my relationships at work, but my wife is starting to wonder what's going on because it seemed to make a difference in my family as well. So it's kind of interesting how when we increase our emotional intelligence, everyone can see it. It's not just in the workplace. It's for a much better, richer life as well. Empathy, I'd mentioned that earlier. We can recognize and appreciate how others feel. We don't need to go there ourselves and say, yeah, I've done that. It's being able to understand where they are. I remember one time I had an employee come in and he stood there and just flat out told me something that was just, from my perception, was a complete untruth. And I thought about it for a long time, and then I realized how I couldn't understand why he could be so sincere. And what I finally determined was that he was telling the truth. He was telling the truth based on his perception of the truth. So it's, keeping out the judgmentalness and just really being able to listen and see, I hear you. You do not have to agree with that person, but an emotionally intelligent, high-level person will be able to empathize without putting our own judgments in there. And that's something that, we as HR professionals need to constantly check and balance. At least that's what I did in my profession, to make sure that anything that any personal feelings would not show up. And I know we walk a fine line in the field of HR because you're kind of right in the middle. You're dealing with the top management and you're dealing with the individuals on the bottom line of the organization, and you need to keep your integrity on both sides. So empathy is a really good skill to have. Social responsibility is another one that is measured under interpersonal. And how do you contribute to society? How do you contribute to other individuals? Are you out volunteering to do things? Are you starting up new programs? Your social responsibility, both personally and professionally. Interpersonal skills, low regulated interpersonal skills can cause overreaction, and we all know what happens there. I think that's called conflict.
Or how does emotional intelligence engage with, you know, the new buzzword that we're talking about in a lot of our programs is not how to manage your conflict, but how to use conflict as a means of pushing for something better, innovating, better teamwork, etc. And so this piece here that you one before this regarding that interpersonal effectiveness, low self-regulation folks tend to react to conflict or differences of opinions, etc. Whereas high IQ individuals, what do they do with conflict that's so different?
Well, they have the self-regulation, so first of all, they don't get involved in the conflict themselves. They stop and think about the situation, assess the entire situation, and react accordingly. And as a high EQ person, if you're observing something that's going on, like the conflict, then it's easy for you to maybe step in and ask questions. One of the big things about coaching that works so well is asking questions and being curious about what's going on. Curiosity is a really high skill level, and it's not in the emotional intelligence, but curiosity helps us to really understand what's going on with other people as well as ourselves. So it's taking the time to find out what's really happening here and using self-regulation, keeping your own emotions out of it.
Mm-hmm. What I find interesting about that piece, and you may come to this in a little bit, Sandy, but I remember reading the Talent Smart report. I don't remember when it was, but it was specifically, they tested emotional intelligence along, it was over 30 other workplace skills, right? And the research showed that emotional intelligence is the strongest predictor of performance. Of all
Absolutely, yes. And you know, we can be the highest, well, oftentimes, as you know, some of our clients in high-level executive positions tend to be very goal-oriented as far as the work. They can get things done and achieve great financial bottom line results, but they leave a disastrous trail behind them of high turnover and causing much more damage to the organization than someone who has great relationships and is able to
still drive for results.
Absolutely.
You know, we need the leaders who can drive for the results but not have collateral damage along the way. And what I'm hearing you talk about with the development of emotional intelligence, there is a self-management skill that individuals can develop in regards to their emotions and flexibility and change tolerance, and a relationship management skill, how they relate to others, their ability to have empathy, their ability to create trust and not just manage conflict, but engage in productive, positive conflict, we'll even call it. Okay, that's very helpful, Sandy. I hope you don't mind if
No,
us
that
having a
was a great.
dialogue on this.
Thank
So.
you, Anita. That was a great overall evaluation of what we've been talking about. Decision making is another thing that is effective. It's one of the 5 scales that we're talking about, and underneath that, how we measure that consists of, how do you solve problems, and effectively manage emotions while you're solving the problems. Reality testing. In the assessment itself, there are the scales and subscales that I've been describing, and it also shows how different subscales affect other subscales. So, for instance, like what you were just talking about earlier, how your self-perception or self-management affects your interpersonal relationships, or how it affects your decision making. So this assessment will not only just measure how you are in a particular area, but it also measures how this affects the other area. So there's a reality piece in that makes this such a wonderful tool. And another of the areas of the 5 areas is stress management, and underneath that we have flexibility, adapting to change, and we all know that's very important because everything changes every day. The only constant in this world today is change. And how do we tolerate stress? Successfully coping with stress is very important in order to function very effectively in an organization or in life. Optimism. Do we have a positive outlook on life? Is your glass half empty or is it half full? That's pretty important. And another thing that shows up in this, it just kind of pops out at the end of the assessment, which is really cool, is there's a happiness rating that pops out of this 2.0. There's no questions on happiness, but it looks at all the different pieces and see how they come together to show your overall happiness. And it's whether you're feeling satisfied and enjoying life. Some of the areas that they get this information from is when they pull information from the self-regard, the optimism, interpersonal relationships, and self-actualization. All kind of compiles together to give you a happiness scale, which is kind of cool.
That's very cool. I can imagine, though, that if someone was unhappy to read that it's in black and white, we predict that you are unsatisfied.
Well,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the whole point of this, the good part of this assessment is it's not like, an MBTI, for instance. I had my Myers-Briggs taken years ago, and throughout my career I've had it taken over and over again, and even to this day it's the same actual number that I had from the first time I took it. So it's kind of amazing. That doesn't happen here. This gives us hope. So if you're unhappy right now, well, guess what? You have the opportunity to change that. Yay. And here's some of the things that you focus on to make that happen.
That's beautiful.
So the results are an overall result for each subscale and feedback that we get, and also strategies. So when you receive your assessment, there's actually 2 assessments. You do need to be certified to be able to use the tool, so that when the assessment comes out, it is 2 different sheets, 2 different data sheets. One is the self-assessment for the individual, and the other one is for the coach. And so it gives you ideas as a coach to be able to, or the feedback person, to be able to talk to the individual and see, some of these things might be areas that you want to focus on. So it really is, this is what it looks like, the sample report. And you can see there's a lot of information in there. But let me tell you, this report is someone with a low EQ. And if you've got a high EQ, you're going to be way to the right. And if see the arrows here indicate that that's the norm. And the norms are also something that you can select going into an assessment. Are you going to compare the individual with the general workforce? Are you going to compare them with the, in the general workforce, it's people of the same gender, the same type of work that you're doing, and that's the comparison group that you're working with. You can also do a comparison group to the entire population, so general population. And there's another one that you can do for leadership. So as you do the assessment, you choose which comparison that you want to use. So that would affect these different. And as you can see, this person has a lot of opportunity to EQ. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. So share a little bit about how do HR professionals, let's talk a little bit. I know why this would be helpful. I certainly know why we use it with some of our leadership development programs, for example. And oftentimes when we're doing a multifaceted emerging leader program, high potential program that has training components, EQ is 100% of the time in the components, not just because Turnkey recommends it, because most of our clients say this is an important piece, a component that companies today understand. What I want to know, Sandy, is how can an HR professional support this dialogue deeper into their organization? Emotions historically have not been, even the conversation around emotions and around feelings has simply not been tolerated. I know that that's changing, but I know it has not changed across the board. How can HR folks begin to have the conversation about building emotional intelligence?
Well, there's a couple of things that as an HR professional I would recommend is that to really pay attention to the EQ, and if you don't understand what's entailed there, then I suggest you find out, because as I was talking about earlier, using EQ as a hiring process, you can do that generally, but if you want to go in and find out specifically how an individual what their level of EQ and want to work on it, typically what happens is that you would have a 360 completed, but also keep in mind as an HR person, if you have someone come in and do an EQ assessment, it's normally confidential between the individual and the person who's doing the feedback. And so what you would get as an HR professional would be a set of goals from that individual and find out what they are working on, and you can work on them with that. The other thing is you could become an HR feedback person yourself, but I think it's oftentimes better to have someone do it externally, because again, it keeps the confidentiality. And some people have internal training and development organizations that do that. But there's a lot of different ways, but the main thing is to keep in mind, become educated on what emotional intelligence means so you can incorporate it in your hiring process. Does that help?
It does, and I think that inside of that is a deeper answer. You know, if talking about feelings or talking about emotions or communicating to the leadership team, hey, listen, if we bring forth an emotional intelligence value, and the values consist of flexibility, change tolerance, treating people with respect, anger management, trust, or whatever it is. What I'm hearing you say, by understanding and doing some studying around the research feeding into emotional intelligence, there's a lot of data out there that can support an HR professional in saying this type of program of bringing forth an EQ development type piece to our leadership competency programs. It's supported by the data, it's supported by the research. And what I'm also underneath what you're saying is that when a company has identified that their values are values like treating people with respect, trust, right, honor, integrity, that those are high EQ values as well. So I'm trying to map it. How would an HR professional sell? If we have a lot of folks on the call that are HR professionals, so they're interested in emotional intelligence, and I have seen it be a challenge to have that conversation inside organizations about EQ, about emotions, and why they're important.
And I think one of the keep in mind is some of the earlier slides that I talked about and how it actually affects the bottom line. And when you start having that conversation to, say, the leadership team, they will immediately recognize the value of this, because they are oftentimes struggling with how to deal with each other, how to deal with the workforce, and how to increase that bottom line, what's going on with turnover. So it's not real hard to get their attention if you know what you're talking about in areas of emotional intelligence, increasing that in organization. So the beauty of it, again, is that you're able to, bringing in something like this, you can actually increase the emotional intelligence, which increases everything in the organization. So,
Gotcha.
And there's also, as I had alluded to earlier, the EQ 360, which is the same questions, but it's also getting feedback from all the other individuals, peers, managers, direct reports. And in order to really increase your effectiveness, increase your EQ, feedback is critical. And you think you're doing a great job, but then you talk to someone else and it's like, whoa, guess I need to work on this area a little bit more. And this is what that ends up looking like. So the report that you get, you'll see that there's the self-rated, how you rate yourself and how other people rate you. So there you get this little chart and say, wow, there's some pretty significant areas of difference in these. How your leaders, how your peers, how your
managers, direct reports, peers,
exactly.
And how you rated yourself.
So
and with any 360 report like this, being able to analyze the gap between how I rated myself versus how my team or manager rate me is exactly the difference in reality versus perception.
Absolutely, and it gives you a lot to work on. So applying it, you can apply EQI in your selection process, self-awareness, succession planning, leadership development, executive coaching, and team effectiveness. I mean, this EQ affects every area, and so you can apply it in all these different areas from an HR perspective. Okay, so take a look at the attributes at the beginning of the workshop and notice what you jotted down. Was it something about high IQ, or did it have emotional intelligence? What kind of attributes did you put down? And I think you can quickly understand the answer.
The most admired
Absolutely.
people, think of someone you really admire. I certainly can speak for myself. The items I wrote down were stable, person of her word, accepts accepting of differences, non-judgmental. I mean, every single one of those are emotional signs of a high IQ. Excuse me, EQ. No one said I had a high IQ. No, just kidding. High EQ.
Yeah. Okay, so in conclusion, I have a little quote here from Margaret Mead: and never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So as HR professionals, we can go out and change the world.
I love that. I love that. One of the things that, thank you very much, Sandy. I'd like to certainly open it up to questions for you guys that are on the call. And if you have any questions, feel free to submit those into that question form right there. And Sandy, I know that we only have a few more minutes. One of the things I'd like to have you share with me is, how are HR professionals using this in their organization? You gave us a lot of ways that they could use it, but let's take team development, for example, or executive development. How are they using EQ and the knowledge around emotional intelligence to create culture change?
Well, I think in all of those areas that you mentioned, it's important to be aware of how people perceive you, and how you present yourself. And I'm saying you as the person with the high EQ, and that shows up in every area. One of the things that I would think that comes to mind quickly is in the hiring process. Now, personally, when I was going through an interview process, when I was putting together an interview process, and I've done this as a consultant for other companies as well, is behavioral interviewing. When you do even in the job descriptions, you want to make sure that includes emotional intelligence and measurements for that, and behavioral questions. You want to make sure that if you have pre-written questions, that they encompass all of the areas that are important, like how do you perceive yourselves, how do you work with others, what's your tolerance for error, and all. You can really weave that into your organization to build a great team. And when you're doing team development, again, you need all of these same skills to be able to work with other individuals. As a team, you need to be able to manage stress, to be empathetic to other people. So it's important, if you see that a team is struggling, maybe what you'd want to do is have them all take a EQI assessment and put together a development plan where they can work individually and use the same kind of language as a value for the team. What's important to the team, and how are we going to work together? And you can just even set out some of these, use these same attributes as a value statement for each of the teams. I mean, it just really can be the center of how you operate.
That's very helpful. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. Melanie Williams, thank you for asking. She has asked, how do we gain access to the test, and how do we find a third party who can assess an EQI 2.0? And Melanie, we certainly at Turnkey Coaching Solutions, with Sandy at the helm, can support an organization in bringing forth an EQ assessment process or administering the assessments. We also Sandy has coordinated with a certifying body to provide our clients with a certification process at a discounted rate. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if we may provide just a consultation around that. If we're a good fit, we'd be happy to discuss it further. If not, we can point you in the right direction. Sandy can be reached at sandra.clausen@turnkeycoachingsolutions.com. Or what you see on your screen also reaches us, 281-469-4244. I also wanted to share a question that Deborah Davis-Noel has asked about, do you have information or something written on how to sell this to your organization? We get that question all the time. How do you sell assessments or leadership development programs, et cetera, to an organization? and we certainly can put something together that is valuable in the data. Sandy, do you have some of the white paper or the research studies that also validate the results?
Oh, I have a lot of information, Anissa, and I'm more than happy to share that if anyone has an interest and wants to, send me an email, and that's Clausen with a K, Klausen, or certainly inquire through Turnkey. That's probably the best solution. But any additional information, and I think you can probably find something about it just about anywhere on the web too, because it's so important. But I think
agreed. And for anyone that's listening, if you'll send an email to the email that's on the screen, I'll make sure that Sandy gets that, and we'll put something together. In fact, I'm sure we already have quite a few pieces around employing emotional intelligence, competency building type programs, and or just assessments and feedback processes for leaders and emerging leader development, et cetera. Sandy, Corey, I think it's Scavelli. If I apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly, Corey, but Corey asks, how do you feel this compares to using the predictive index in the selection process? Are you familiar with the predictive index?
Actually, I'm not. So, question, I don't know if you
have limited experience with the predictive index. I can say that we have a number of clients who use it in the hiring process and believe it is very supportive. I understand that the predictive index is efficient. It only takes a candidate about 10 minutes to go through, and the clients that we work with that use it find it helpful in the hiring process. What I have not seen any of our clients who also work with us on leadership development. They are not able to necessarily, I have personally not seen it be used in a development process. I have seen companies who will use the EQ assessment to assess whether or not an individual has the personality or is a good cultural fit. And then I have also seen the EQ used for development purposes for employees and leaders and HIPO programs, where the goal is let's build a strong bench of ready now leaders. And so the differences to me is really about cultural fit and predicting success in the early stages of a relationship. Predictive index seems to be pretty effective at that, if our clients have told us anything. But as far as development purposes, I really see a huge difference between using that versus the EQ, for example.
And that's the beauty of this, is if you do hire someone with a low EQ, you have an opportunity to develop that person and increase.
I think that's pretty valid, and it's also interesting. I do know that there are EQ self-assessments out there that explicitly say, do not use for hiring. I know companies that do that anyway, but I personally think that we want to be very mindful of that piece of it. And this particular one that you are certified in, Sandy, has a great deal of research and studies and validation, which I think can make a huge difference in the validity of the report, the usefulness.
Well, I mean, you certainly can, but if you're going to use something like this, I would use it on a very high level individual. If you're going to invest in this kind of time and just the investment itself, you would want to probably use it if you are hiring a very senior level individual and you maybe have 2 or 3 candidates that you're seriously looking at. So that would probably be when I would use it. I wouldn't use it for the general hires, but more in the development pieces of it, but you certainly could use it when you're
in the executive level.
Yeah, or even,
my understanding,
for succession planning within the organization. I think it would be
correct.
highly effective for succession planning.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that the nuance aspect of the EQ report is pretty valuable and pretty important. And what I mean by that is just the categories and subcategories that you laid out, being able to understand a person's self-management versus relationship management skills, their empathy skills versus their, I don't remember some of the other ones, but the ratings on those and the ability for someone to see their overall emotional intelligence and where they are can be an important indicator of a cultural match or not.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, even in the reverse, I certainly have some clients whose cultures are fast driving and really intense, and for you guys on the phone that know DISC, it's high D's all the way across the board, and some folks who are much more easygoing are simply not a good fit for that particular culture, and that works for them. All right, so we have, I think that is it. It is top of the hour. I want to say thank you very much for everyone on the call. We value and appreciate your time. If we may answer any questions, support you or your organization in evaluating an emotional intelligence assessment or program or training, I would love the opportunity to simply have a complimentary consultation regarding your needs. And like I said earlier, if we're not a good fit, we will look to see if we have someone in our network that might be. So thank you again for attending, and thank you, Sandy, so much for being here. And I want to also thank David Whitmarsh with the Whitmarsh Consulting Group for sponsoring our program today. Thank you, and goodbye. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.